All right, welcome to Riley's Documents and Drafts, the podcast where we talk about all kinds of fun things. Um, Important historical documents, especially to the United States, um, and drink some really cool beers along the way. We'll look at the background of each document and beer, and we'll read the document and talk about the beer. We'll do some other cool things as well. We usually talk about some historical cases. I might give you some personal reflection. The plan is to do about one a month, and we'll go from there. All the background music is provided by Soundstripe. I usually uses a blues genre. Today, we are going to look at John Dickinson's Observations on the Constitution, George Washington's There Is No Alternative. We are drinking some Wolf's Ridge, The Old Man and the Beer, and historical cases. We're going to talk about Cummins v. Missouri, Davis v. Besson, and the worst decision ever made, Dred Scott. All right, so here we go. Talk to you about it again. So we use these two books called 50 Core American Documents. Let me check one thing real quick. Okay, we're in the right place, doing the right things. Called 50 Core American Documents, provided by Ashbrook Press from Ashland University and Our Nation's Archives, a history of the United States in documents. Edited by Eric Brunn and Jay Crosby. And we're going to use that book especially today. We're drinking some Wolf's Ridge Old Man in the Sea. It's called This Beer is My Friend Too. I've never seen or heard such a beer, but I must drink him. Slow brewed, old world crafted premium malts from it's a Baltic porter from Wolf's Ridge in Columbus, Ohio. Again, we're going to look at John Dickenson, who is on the left. A thing called Observations on the Constitution, and George Washington on the right. His There Is No Other Alternative. And then we'll talk about Wolf's Ridge, and then we'll look at the Supreme Court cases. All right, so if I remember how to do this. So the first thing we're going to do, not what I wanted to do. Why did that go away? Now I can't make it big. Give me a minute. Give me a minute. Working through some issues. Well, I want to. Oh, right in front of me. Sorry. Let's go to the return to meeting. There we go. We need to go back to the shares. There we go. I apologize for that. All right, so here we are. We're going to go and read. We'll stick on their pictures. The first thing we're going to do is read John Dickinson's Observations on the Constitution. And by the way, you can find us on most podcast platforms: iHeart, Spotify, YouTube, Spreaker.com, Podcast Addict. All right, here we go. Observations on the Constitution. This is the background. Critics of the Constitution decried it as putting too much authority in the hands of a central government that could infringe on individual liberties. John Dickinson, however, argued that in this article on the necessity of sacrificing separate rights for the good of all. He argues that the preservation of liberty requires some sacrifice of freedom. It is a theme that has resonated throughout American history. In a delicate balance, Dickinson's article appeared in the Pennsylvania Mercury and Universal Advisor, April 17, 1788. A Philadelphia lawyer, Dickenson helped write the Articles of Confederation. So, in arguing for the Constitution, he was in effect lobbying against his own creation. All right, here we go. John Dickenson, the man on the left. The writer of this address hopes that he will now be thought so disengaged from the objections against the part of the principle assumed concerning the power of the people that he may be excused for recurring to his assertions that the power of the people pervading the proposed system together with the strong confederation of the states will form an adequate security against every danger that it has been apprehended. It is a mournful but may be useful truth that the liberty of a single republic has generally been destroyed by some of its own citizens, and of confederated republics by some of the associated states. It is more pleasing and may be more profitable to reflect that their tranquility and prosperity have commonly been promoted in proportion to the strength of their governments for protecting the worthy against the licentious, I think. As in forming a political society, each individual contributes some of his rights in order that he may, from a common stock of rights, derive greater benefits than he could from merely his own. So in forming a confederation, each political society should contribute such a share of their rights as will, from common stock of rights, produce the largest quantity of benefits from them. But what is that share and how should it be managed? That's a momentous question. Here, flattery is treason and error destruction. Are they unanswerable? No. Our most gracious Creator does not condemn us to a sight for unattainable blessedness. But one thing he demands, that we should seek for it in his way and not in our own. Humility and benevolence must take place of pride and overweening selfishness. Reason, then, rising above these myths, will discover to us that we cannot be true to ourselves without being true to others. That it be solitary is to be wretched. That to love our neighbor as ourselves is to love ourselves in the best manner. That to give is to gain. And that we never consult our own happiness more effectually than when we most endeavor to correspond with the divine designs, by communicating happiness as much as we can. To our fellow creatures, an inestimable truth, sufficient, if they do not barely ask what it is, to melt tyrants into men and to soothe the inflamed minds of a multitude into mildness, sufficient to overflow the earth with unknown felicity. Inestimable truth, which our Maker, in his providence, enables us not only to talk and write about, but to adopt and practice of vast extent and of instructive example. Let us now inquire if there be not some principle, simple as the law of nature in other instances, from which, as from a source, the many benefits of society are deducted. We may, with reverence, say that our Creator designed men for society because otherwise they could not be happy. They could not be happy without freedom, nor free without security. Without society, free without security, that is, without the absence of fear, nor thus secure without society. The conclusion is strictly syllogistic, that men cannot be free without society, which freedom produces the greatest happiness. As these premises are invincible, we have advanced a considerable way in our inquiry upon this deeply interesting subject. If we can determine what share of his rights every individual must contribute to the common stock of rights in forming a society for obtaining equal freedom, we determine at the same time what share of their rights each political society must contribute to the common stock of rights in forming a confederation, which is only a larger society, for obtaining equal freedom. For if the deposit not be proportioned in the magnitude of the association in the latter case, it will generate the same mischief among the component parts of it from their inequality that would result from a defective contribution to associate in the former case among the component parts of it. From their inequality, Each individual then must contribute such a share of his rights as is necessary for attaining that security that is essential freedom, and he is bound to make this contribution by law of his nature, that by the command of his Creator, therefore, he must submit his will in what concerns all to the will of the whole society. What does he lose by this submission? The power of doing injuries to others, the dread of suffering injuries from them, and the incommodities of mental or bodily weakness. What does he gain by it? The aid of those associated with him, protection against injuries from them or others, the capacity of enjoying his undelegated rights to the best advantage, a repeal of his fears, and tranquility of mind, or, in other words, the perfect liberty better described in his holy scriptures than anywhere else. In these expressions, when every man shall sit under a vine and under his fig tree, and none shall make him afraid. The like submission with the correspondence, expansion, and accommodation must be made between states for the like benefits of a confederation. If, as some person seems to think, a Bill of Rights is the best security of rights, the sovereignties of the several states have this best security, for they are not barely declared to be rights, but are taken into it as component parts for their perpetual preservation by themselves. In short, the government of each state is and is to be sovereign and supreme in all matters that relate to each state only. It is to be subordinate barely in those matters that relate to the whole, and it will be their own faults if the several states suffer from the federal sovereignty to interfere in things of their respective jurisdictions. An instance of such interference with regard to a single state will be as dangerous precedent as to all, and therefore will be guarded against by all, as the trustees or servants of the several states will not dare, if they retain their senses, so to violate the independent sovereignty of their respective states. The justly darling object of American affections to which they are responsible, besides being endeared by all charities of life, the common sense of mankind agreed that the devolution of individuals will in society, and if it had not been universally assented to in Confederation, the reasons are evident and worthy of being retained in remembrance by Americans. How beautifully and forcibly does the inspired Apostle St. Paul argue upon a sublimer subject with a train of reasons strictly applicable to the present. His words are, if the fool shall say, because I am not the hand, I am not the body, is it therefore not of the body? And if the ear shall say, because I am not the eye, I am not of the body, is it therefore not of the body? As plainly inferring as could be done in the allegorical manner. The strongest censure of such partial discontents, especially as his meaning is enforced by his description of the benefits of union in these expressions. But now they are many members, yet but one body, and the eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of them again, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. From the book Our Nation's Archives, Eric Brun and Jay Crosby, John Dickinson's, what was it called? John Dickinson's Observations on the Constitution. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we are going to take a look at Wolf's Ridge Brewing, which is the beer I'm drinking of. So we're going to, where is that? It should be here. There it is. So let's see what we can find out about Wolf's Ridge. There we go. Our story. This comes from wolfsridgebrewing.com. Established in 2013, Wolf's Ridge has grown into one of Columbus's premier dining and drinking destinations, winning numerous local and national awards for their food and drink programs that have become synonymous with quality, inventiveness, and approachability. My apology. Co-founded by father-son duo Alan and Bob Zutzer. It all started with a passion for good beer. Alan, and a businessman and avid home brewer, followed this passion across the country, experiencing the collaboration, community, and quality valued by the growing craft brewing industry. Says I've always had that entrepreneurial itch, and as I began to simultaneously experiment with home brewing, I kept thinking about all those incredible brewers and business owners I met on my travels. Thought to myself, maybe I could try doing this back home in Columbus. While considering what the community of Columbus needed from a craft brewer experience, it became clear that the brewery would need to be open with a fresh local dining concept to match. Enter Alan's son, Bob. He had cultivated enthusiasm for creating outstanding guest experiences and dreamt of opening a fine dining establishment like the one he'd experienced in bigger cities. When I was living in Chicago, going out to eat was something that was really special, something you could anticipate. I wanted to create that same feeling here. So the brewery is in Columbus, and it's very good. They're okay. I was trying to find about shop. Here's packaged beer. Here's what you can get if you're somewhat near. Yes, I'm 21. My apologies for all this. By the way, the music is provided by Soundstripe. Let's get some more planned. Okay. So Daybreak 6-pack, World Cup gold medal winner. Dire Wolf 614 lager, Heffa 6-pack, Kegs, and then Walking Taco 6-pack, Hazy IPA 6-pack, and then you've got all these seasonals. Salted Caramel Dire Wolf, Peach Sunrise, Famous Red, The Old Man and the Beer 4-pack, which is what I'm drinking right now. Wolf's Ridge Select. I don't want to join. Nope. Get that out of here. You can get malty beers like the 614 Lager, the Mook and Rock, or the Salted Caramel. And then hoppy beers, they have some IPAs. So that's kind of Wolf's Ridge Brewing. It's very good. So again, that's Wolf Ridge Brewing. Pretty cool. Now let me go back to where we were. I don't know why I keep doing this to myself. All right, here we go. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to see what kind of time we got left. Plenty of time. All right. Get rid of that. Okay. Oh my gosh. So we're going to, there we go. So you can see my pretty face. George Washington. Okay. This is called, There Is No Alternative. Again, this is from Our Nation's Archives, from Eric Bryan and Jay Crosby. I'm drinking this wonderful Old Man and the Beer, Wolf's Ridge Baltic Porter. All right, here we go. Like many of the signers of the Constitution, Washington had mixed feelings about the particulars of the document. However, as this 1788 letter written to the Marquis de Lafayette made clear, Washington was willing to overlook the details for the sake of the most pressing issue. For Washington, those were limiting the power of government to as little as possible and dividing government into branches that would prevent the rise of any single individual or class. The alternative to the Constitution, he believed, was anarchy. All right, so here we go. You appear to be, as might be expected from a real friend to this country, anxious and concerned about its present political situation. So far as I am able, I shall be happy in gratifying that friendly solicitude. As to my sentiments with respect to the merits of the new Constitution, I will disclose them without reserve. Although by passing through the post office they should become known to the world, for in truth I have nothing to conceal on that subject. It appears to me then little sort of a miracle that the delegates from so many different states, which states you know are also different from each other in their manners, circumstances, and prejudices, shall unite in forming a system of national government so little liable to well-funded objections, nor am I yet an enthusiastic, partial, or undiscriminating admirer, as not to perceive it is tick-turned with some real, though not radical, defects. The limits of the letter would not suffer me to go fully into the examination of them, nor would the discussion be entertaining or profitable. I therefore forbear to touch upon it with regard to the two great points, the pivots on which the whole machine must move. My creed is simple. First, that the general government is not invested with more powers than are indispensably necessary to perform the function of a good government, and consequently that no objection ought to be made against the quantity of power delegated to it. Secondly, that those powers, as the appointment of all rulers will forever arise from, and at short stated intervals recur to the free suffrage of the people, are so distributed among the legislative, executive, and judicial branches into which the general government is arranged, that it can never be in danger of degenerating into monarchy, an oligarchy, or an aristocracy, or any other despotic or oppressive form, so long as there shall remain any virtue in the body of the people. I would not be understood, my dear Marquis, to speak of the consequences which may be produced in the revolution of ages by corruption of morals, profligacy of manners, and listlessness for the preservation of the natural and unalienable rights of mankind, nor any of the successful usurpations that may be established at such an unpropitious juncture upon the ruins of liberty, however providently guarded and secured, as these are contingencies against which no human prudence can effectually provide. It will at least be a recommendation to the proposed Constitution that it is provided with more checks and barriers against the introduction of tyranny, and those of a nature less liable to be surmounted than any government hitherto instituted among mortals hath possessed. We are not to expect perfection in this world, but mankind in modern times have apparently made some progress in the science of government. Should that which is now offered to the people of America be found on experiment less perfect than it can be made, a constitutional door is left open for its amelioration. Some respectable characters have wished that the states, having pointed out whatever alterations and amendments may be judged necessary, would appoint another federal convention to modify it upon these documents. For myself, I have wondered that sensible men should not see the impracticability of that scheme. The members would go fortified with such instructions that nothing but discordant ideas could prevail. Had I but slightly suspected, at the time when the late convention was in session, that another convention would not likely to agree upon a better form of government, I should now be confirmed in the fixed belief that they would not be able to agree upon any system whatever. So many, I may add, such contradictory and, in my opinion, unfounded objections have been urged against the system in contemplation, many of which would operate equally against every efficient government that might be proposed. I will only add as a farther opinion founded on the maturest deliberation that there is no alternative, no hope for alteration, no immediate resting place between the adoption of this and a recurrence to an unqualified state of anarchy with all its deplorable consequences. So that was George Washington's "There's no alternative." So far we have read John Dickinson's opinions on the Constitution. We're drinking some Old Man of the Beer from Wolf's Ridge Brewing. It's a Baltic Porter. It's very good. We read George Washington's There's No Alternative. And so now we are going to look at some Supreme Court cases, some historic Supreme Court cases that we'll go from there. All right. Where can I go? Okay, here we go. So we're going to look at three cases. We're going to look at Cummings versus Missouri, Davis versus Besson, and Davis versus Massachusetts. Is that correct? Oh, and Dred Scott. We'll skip Davis v. Massachusetts. So the first one, Cummings v. Missouri. Here we go. This is from a website called oye.org. So this was Cummings versus Missouri was in 1866. Here's the facts. Following the Civil War, Congress and Missouri adopted provisions that required persons in specific professional occupations to take an oath that they have never given aid to the rebellion or the secession. Missouri convicted a priest who refused to take the oath. A former Confederate congressman asked the Supreme Court for permission to practice without taking the federal oath. So the question was, do the states and national oaths violate prohibitions against ex post facto laws and bills of attainder in the Constitution? The conclusion, Justice Field, writing for a divided court, held that both state and national oath laws were unconstitutional. The oath laws transformed acts that had not been forbidden into crimes and increased the punishment of acts that were known to be crimes. The oath laws were also bills of attainders, as they were legislative acts that inflicted punishment without the benefit of a trial by judge. Interesting. I would like to have seen what the divided court was, but we don't get that. All right, here's the other one. Oh, I don't know why it does that, but here we go. Got to find it again. Davis v. Besson. This was argued December 9th and 10th, 1889. Facts of the case. In 1882, Congress passed the Edmunds Act, which made polygamy a felony and required voters to swear that they were neither bigamists nor polygamists. The Idaho Territory required a similar oath and a condition of registering to vote. In April 1889, Samuel Davis, a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, was indicted for falsely swearing the oath prior to the 1888 election. Davis appealed his conviction via writ of habeas corpus, claiming that the required oath violated his right to free exercise of religion under the First Amendment. The Federal Territorial Court denied Davis's claim. The constitutional question was, does a ban on polygamy, for those of you that don't know, polygamy means having more than one wife at a time. Look, I've been married almost 40 years. I don't know why, and I love her to death, but I don't know why anybody would have more than one wife at a time. Does a ban on polygamy violate the First Amendment right to free exercise of religion? In conclusion, in a unanimous decision authored by Justice Stephen Field, the court rejected the Davis notion that polygamy was a meaningful tenet of a religion and thus rejected Davis's claims to First Amendment protections. Justice Field condemned the practice of polygamy and bigamy, saying, to extend exceptions from punishment for such crimes would be to shock the moral judgment of the community. The opinion notes that in the context of the First Amendment, religion refers primarily to one's views on his relationship with his Creator and the modes of worship. And it is not intended to be invoked as a protection against legislation for the punishment of acts inimical to the peace, good order, and morals of society. So that was Davis v. Besson. Now, we are going to look at the worst case of all time, worst decision of all time. Dred Scott v. Sanford. And it's a little bit out of chronological order. This decision was February 11th through 1856, decided in 1857. The facts of the case. Dred Scott was a slave in Missouri from 1833 to 1843. He resided in Illinois, which was a free state. In the Louisiana Territory, where slavery was forbidden, and in the Louisiana Territory, where slavery was forbidden by the Missouri Compromise of 1820. After returning to Missouri, Scott filed a suit in the Missouri court for his freedom, claiming that his residence in free territory made him a free man. After losing, Scott brought a new suit in federal court. Scott's master maintained that no quote-unquote Negro or descendant of slaves could be a citizen in the sense of Article 3 of the Constitution. So was Dred Scott free or slave? Oh, Judge Taney. This was a 7-2 decision. Majority opinion was written by Judge Roger Taney. Did hold portions of the Missouri Compromise unconstitutional, violation of the Fifth Amendment, treating Scott as property and not as persons. So here we go. Remember, this is a precursor, 1857. You get the Civil War 3 years later. This was a catalyst to that. The majority held that a quote-unquote Negro whose ancestors were imported into the United States and sold as slaves, whether enslaved or free, could not be an American citizen and therefore did not have standing to sue in federal court because the court lacked jurisdiction. Taney dismissed the case on procedural grounds. But Taney further held that the Missouri Compromise of 1820 was unconstitutional and foreclosed Congress from freeing slaves within federal territories. The opinion showed the deference in the Missouri court, which held that moving to a free state did not render Scott emancipated. Finally, Taney ruled that the slaves were property under the Fifth Amendment, and that any law that was a private slave owner of that property was unconstitutional. Thankfully, there were 2 dissenters. In dissent, Benjamin Robbins Curtis criticized Taney for addressing the claim's substance after finding the court lacked jurisdiction. He pointed out that that invalidating the Missouri Compromise was not necessary to resolve the case, and cast doubt on Taney's position that the founders categorically opposed anti-slavery laws, which, yeah, a lot of the founders were anti-slavery. Some weren't, lots were. John McLean echoed Curtis, finding the majority improperly reviewed the claim's substance when its holding should have been limited to procedure. He also argued that men of African descent could be citizens because they already had the right to vote in 5 states. I didn't know that. So that was interesting. And of course, dissent becomes more important as time goes by. But it's still an absolutely horrible decision that, unfortunately, was rendered moot after the Civil War and overturned because of the 13th and 15th Amendments, 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. We are not going to do current cases like we normally do because I wanted to give a couple pieces of personal reflection. You know, we had a government shutdown because they could not come to a budget agreement. We need to stop budgeting by continuing a resolution, get a budget, sign it, follow it. We're spending way too much money that we don't have. What we should do, and we could solve the budget in a matter of minutes in a couple of years if we would just freeze spending and federal hiring at current levels for about the next 5 years. That would wipe out most of the debt. But we won't do that. Because when you listen to them, if you freeze spending at current levels and you used to get a certain increase every year, they'll call that a cut, which it's not. The second piece is Part of the issue with that was wanting to do the ACA subsidies, to extend them to make sure that people could afford ACA health insurance. Well, if you need subsidies for ACA health insurance, then ACA is not affordable, which is why I'm not calling it the Health Care Act. I'll call it ACA. You can solve health insurance really simply. You have to treat it like car insurance. So it's right now under law, if Aetna, for example, has Aetna Southern Ohio and Aetna Northern Ohio and Aetna West Virginia and Aetna Western Pennsylvania, you cannot combine those pools of people. The way insurance works, the larger the pool, the lower the premium because it spreads risk out among more persons. But health insurance is set up so everything has to be done in pockets. Well, do away with that. Let the pools let the pools get as big as possible and allow health insurance to be sold across state lines. Premiums drop, government gets out of it, prices go down, it'll work. But that's too simple of a solution, so it will never happen. The last piece of what I'm going to talk about is the Epstein files. Okay, and we'll talk about that for a sec. And the Epstein files, he was Jeffrey Epstein and his partner Ghislaine Maxwell were indicted for child trafficking, but nobody was arrested for the solicitation of child trafficking. Um, so you need to release the files, and they need to be transparent. The DOJ needs to don't redact anything. If it brings down the government and a bunch of people have to resign, who cares? They shouldn't be there. If they've been there more than 20 years, they shouldn't be there anyway. But those are my personal reflections. I normally don't do that. I try to stay apolitical, but that was it. So thanks for listening to Riley's Documents and Drafts podcast, where we do a historical documents, especially to the U.S., and drink some cool beers along the way. Today, we used our nation's archives of history of the United States in documents. We we read John Dickinson's view of the Constitution and George Washington's There's No Other Alternative. We are drinking The Old Man and the Beer, a Baltic Porter from Wolf's Ridge Brewing. It's very good. If you ever get to Columbus, make sure you see that. John Dickinson's on the left, Washington's on the right. I want to thank the following people. Again, the SCOTUS info that we used today was from oya.org. Sometimes we use scotusblog.com. The cover art was done by Emma Williams. The YouTube assistance was done by Olivia Baldwin. Wolf Ridge Brewing. Just click on the link. And the podcast is available on Spreaker, iHeart, Spotify, Podcast Addict, and other platforms like YouTube. So I hope that you have enjoyed today, and we will talk to you soon. Stop the share. Again, Soundstripe is the music. So I hope you enjoy it.